Without further ado, I would now like to welcome to the floor our first speaker for today, Martin-Immanuel Bittner, once again, Chief Executive Officer of Arcturus, who will be speaking on combining robotics and machine learning for accelerated drug discovery. Martin-Immanuel, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for these very kind words. It's wonderful to be here. So thank you very much again for the invitation. Well, first of all, it's very nice to be here. And it's wonderful that we can gather with such an excellent group of speakers and such a broad range of attendees from so many different parts of the world. So it's one of the good things about being able to run events virtually. At least you can basically attend things from the comfort of your homes, even if it's thousands of miles away. To start my talk and start this session, I would like to briefly look at one of the biggest challenges we currently see within drug discovery, which is a decline in pharmaceutical R&D productivity. All of us know that drug discovery is very expensive and drug discovery takes a very long time. However, what is even more worrying is that over time, it has become more and more expensive, or in other words, the number of drugs being approved per dollar per research $billion spent has been going down for a very long time. That is, of course, something which is a multifaceted issue where there's various components that need to be addressed, from regulatory to, many people say, that easy targets have already been worked upon. So drug discovery inherently has to become more difficult. But there are also some underlying reasons which I think are particularly important to highlight here. And one of them is the quality of research data. Thanks to studies done by Bayer and Amgen, we know that far too much research out there is not reproducible. We know that between 80 and 90% of preclinical oncology studies, when reproduced by third parties, do not show the same results. And that is something that is incredibly worrying, because in the end, drug discovery is something which builds on and has to build on solid, robust, reliable science. And if we can't even rely on the data which is out there, that of course then puts into question many of the research programs underway that are based on exactly these findings. And just one other number is that cell lines, probably one of the most important research tools out there, in 1 in 2 cases are either contaminated or misidentified. So we really deal with an environment where data quality is really not what it's supposed to be and not what it should be. At the same time, if we look at laboratories today, they more or less look the same way they've been looking like for the past 30, 40, 50 years. The laboratory today still looks so very similar to one from the 60s. Of course, there's new devices, of course, there's new types of experiments, but the work mode itself really has not changed in a very long time. And that is in very stark contrast to most other industries, where there's been a huge increase in the adoption of technology, from early electronics and computers to robotics to machine-to-machine communication to the cloud. Most other walks of life, most of the industries have been transformed to a way in which they are hardly recognizable. So we're seeing this disconnect between so many other industries and between lab research and drug discovery. And that is something which we believe is going to change, because new technologies are having a bigger and bigger impact on drug discovery. And right now is a very exciting time where these technologies reach a new stage of maturation. Of course, the first one coming to mind, probably the most prominent one, is artificial intelligence. And this is a slide which shows how there's a huge increase in the number of AI-driven drug discovery companies that have been founded over the last 10, 15 years, with that growth being in line with further increases in investment in the space. There's, for example, the excellent Stanford report on investment in AI, which also highlights drug discovery and biomedicine as the shining example for the most impressive increase year over year. So in other words, we're seeing that AI-driven drug discovery or machine learning-driven drug discovery is becoming more and more prevalent. If we do look kind of at the numbers in terms of compound annual growth, we can see this is indeed growing kind of very, very impressively. In this case, some Immersion Insights report that we've quoted here. But what I find kind of very interesting is if we try to put this trend into perspective. And to this end, kind of I've chosen kind of this very simple XY graph. When the Y-axis, we can see the amount of data mining or AI and use of AI and AI readiness. And the X-axis on the bottom is the degree of automation, where for the longest time, companies have been in this quadrant we can see right here, with traditional biotech companies, traditional pharma companies, and CROs not really using AI much and relying mostly on manual work. Apart from high throughput screening, that's of course an exception, but for the most part, experiments have been done manually. So that has been the status quo for a very, very long time. And we've then seen kind of a first wave of companies, of AI-driven drug discovery companies, such as in silico medicine, Benevolent, Atomwise, and many, many others, companies that have pioneered the use of AI, ML, deep learning, and other methods to, for example, identify novel targets, such as Benevolent, to identify novel targets and do generative chemistry, such as in silico medicine, to do virtual screening, to repurpose drugs. So there have been many different ways in which AI companies have emerged that address very different parts of the entire drug discovery journey. And at the same time, there's been a second trend which has been completely independent, which is the rise of robotics. And so in the robotics space, we've seen synthetic biology companies such as Zymergen and Ginkgo, cloud laboratories such as Strateos and Emerald Cloud Lab, companies where robotics has played a major role in them being able to run more experiments or to remote control experiments in these foundry-like entities. And what we find particularly exciting is now to think about this last quadrant, which is kind of waiting enough to be filled in on the next slide, where we can see the combination of a very high degree of automation with a very heavy emphasis on data science, AI, and machine learning. And the companies we currently see in this quadrant is predominantly Recursion Pharmaceuticals, Incitro, and ourselves, where the basic idea is the same, which is leveraging the power of automation and leveraging the power of robotics to generate large amounts of highly structured, fully annotated, fully contextualized information, which can then be used as a source for decision making. Because in the end, what these companies have in common is the realization that what I showed in the previous slide, that the lack in data quality and the lack in data structure and the lack in data annotation is one of the biggest obstacles for the widespread adoption of AI in drug discovery. If we look at publicly available data sets, we know that about 90 to 95% don't even pass basic quality control. Machine learning algorithms is something where many of the tools are open access anyways, and where more and more algorithms are becoming increasingly well described. So the true edge in a few years' time is going to be not possession of the algorithms, but the underlying data. Because as every machine learning engineer is going to tell you, garbage in, garbage out. With inferior data come inferior models. With superior data come superior models. It's absolutely crucial from a machine learning perspective. It is absolutely central to have the best possible input data. That means data which is robust, which is reproducible, because if it's not reproducible, it's not real. But it also means data that is far more rich and far better contextualized compared to industry standard. And what I mean by that is saying that for the longest time, when we were performing experiments, we were content with just having a microscope image. And we looked at the image and kind of that would be the experiment or the results of the experiment. However, only looking at the microscope image, which comes out of an experiment, is a very incomplete way of thinking about experimentation, because you don't know how the experiment is being conducted. Was the incubation time 3 hours or 6 hours? Has the drug been added at room temperature, or was the drug heated to 37 degrees centigrade? So many pieces of information which are absolutely crucial to be able to compare data, pool data, and mine data, which as of now are completely being disregarded. And that is the reason why we believe kind of the use of automation and the use of very complex sensor arrays allows us to generate data at a scale and with a quality and with a degree of annotation that is unprecedented. So if we summarize it on this slide, we really feel that there is a big number of companies using very, very interesting AI algorithms, but there's only very few that also generate the data in-house that are being used to train these models. And that is something where we see that this combination of robotics and AI is one of these incredibly promising combinations. And why is that the case? So this diagram shows in a very schematic way how the drug discovery journey is evolving right now, where for the longest time, conventional drug discovery has been kind of a zigzag process from hit to candidate in this case, where there's many iterations, where each iteration that we perform may go in a better direction, it may not, where there's lots of false positives and false negatives, and where the entire design, make, test, analyze, the DMTA cycle is entirely driven by humans. And that is something which requires a lot of time, which requires a lot of efforts, and which means that processes can never run as fast as we would like them to. And that is now something we contrast by doing things kind of differently and by looking at what we see as, in this case, our approach to combining robotics and methods of AI, where we can very drastically reduce the number of iterations that are being required, because each iteration is based on a far richer, far more encompassing data set, and where we can make sure that the cycle itself is done increasingly in an automation, robotics, and machine learning driven fashion. So it's very much about replacing processes with a technological counterpart, which allows us to put the human where the human is best at, which is ingenuity, creativity, oversight, and direction, and not the actual performance of lab work. So that is kind of already kind of my presentation kind of for today. And I hope kind of I gave you kind of a bit of a glimpse into how we see the drug discovery ecosystem evolve, what we see as some of the key areas of growth and of interest, including kind of the combination of robotics and AI, and also why we think that this combination is something which over the coming years is going to have tremendous impact on this industry. Because I think what the Recursion Pharmaceutical IPO has shown is that there is an increasing realization how these processes synergize and how robotics and how AI can work together and lead to very exciting new drug discovery programs. So in other words, it is a very exciting field and a very exciting time. And I'm very glad I was here, and I'm looking forward to receiving questions.
Thank you very much, Martin-Immanuel. That was very insightful. While today's session is primarily focused on AI, we always seek to explore synergies, and the work that you're doing at the intersection of AI and robotics is no exception. So thank you very much for that. Any of our attendees who have specific questions for Martin-Immanuel and Arcturus are encouraged to pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll do our very best to address them during the panel discussion and roundtable a little bit later today. So thank you, Martin-Immanuel.